What are you afraid of? That's the title of a video I posted February 29th, 2024. In it, I discussed many things, including what I used to be afraid of, why I'm not afraid of those things anymore, and what I'm really afraid of: being forgotten when I die. Over a year later, a lot of things have changed, and I thought that on the scariest night of the year, we could revisit this poorly made, abstract thought video and see what I'm actually afraid of.
I'm paranoid now because niggas weird and really bums. I'm paranoid now because niggas weird and really bums. I'm paranoid now because niggas weird and really bum. I'm
Fear is something that we're all familiar with. It's one of the most universal emotions, and for good reason. There's a lot of things that a lot of people are afraid of. There's probably hundreds of thousands of phobias. There's arguments of whether fears are rational or irrational because not everybody is afraid of the same things. And the people who aren't afraid of one thing might see someone as afraid of that thing as being crazy or irrational. Me personally, the one fear that I have is much more personal and probably arises from insecurity because, I want to live a life worth remembering. That's what I talked about over a year ago. Not everybody has that fear. Very few people often think about their death because that's probably the scariest thing anyone could think about. But I personally think it's necessary to think about how much time you have so you spend it effectively. I think it's hard to believe that I'm not afraid of a lot of things, but really, my life is pretty good. I'm very fortunate and very grateful. So I don't have a lot to be afraid of. Things I was afraid of as a child, I've since deemed irrational. Wait a second. Now I'm falling into the same trap as those other people. Let's talk about my childhood for a second. For a long period of my life, I couldn't live without a routine, without a schedule, without having every minute planned out. This was partially because of my OCPD, which may or may not still be a part of me. I definitely still have OCD. But it's also because of my anxiety. Not just my anxiety for not having a routine. It goes much deeper than that. My anxiety was primarily about something that I couldn't control, something that I did not know. This is what's known as agnostophobia, the fear of the unknown. And it's probably been around for as long as any other fear. It's the reason that we have religion and fear pretty much anything we don't understand because it's in our DNA, it's in our instinct. Our evolutionary advantage was being skeptical, and that's why we've survived for so long. The fear of the unknown is essentially an intense anxiety about situations with uncertain or unpredictable outcomes. It's usually, as the name implies, a response to a lack of information, and many people consider this fear irrational. But is it really? Obviously, my childhood with OCPD and actual restlessness because I couldn't know everything that was going to happen is a prime example of agnostophobia, but that's not the only time that it appears. If you couldn't tell, I'm not a religious person, but I do understand the appeal of believing in God or gods, right? Because at the end of the day, religion is based on belief and faith. With science, we have discovered a lot about our universe, but there are still some things we don't know, like why the universe was created, why we evolved. We know how we evolved. We know how we discover things and have an idea roughly of where they came from, but we don't know the underlying why. And that's probably the biggest problem with being agnostic, with being a non-God-fearing man or woman. Because what's our justification? Why does God not exist? Ultimately, the people who fear hell and sinning and all that, the ideas themselves aren't bad. The scriptures and Bibles that have been produced over the years, while there are some inherent flaws that don't match up with our current societal standards, most of the beliefs, like love thy neighbor, treat people the way you want to be treated, it's kinda in our nature, and it would lead to a better society. The whole point of this tangent is to say that religion isn't inherently bad, but you also have to acknowledge the many people who have misinterpreted the scriptures. And you also have to acknowledge the people who don't believe in God, who believe that we should be racist or sexist. Not everybody's perfect, and there's no real way to separate these things. You kind of have to embrace the good and the bad. All I'm trying to say is that when you're talking about fear, faith is probably the greatest defense in our history. There's debates on whether or not the United States is a Christian nation or if we're, separating the church and state. Recently, I've noticed a lot of the former. I feel like it's hard to talk about fear without talking about belief. And while I personally would rather deal in fact than faith, I can't diss anybody who would rather believe that a God created this world. If I were to say that I believed in God, I would believe along more of the deism route, where God wound up the clock of the universe and just left it alone. That would probably be the best fit for me, personally. If you saw my last video on fear, you know that I'm not afraid of very many things. In fact, the only thing that I'm really afraid of is far more abstract, so it doesn't really apply to the scope of this video. Whoa. You are afraid of much more than just not being remembered. What are you talking about? Well, you're afraid of losing people you care about. You're afraid of failure. You're afraid of everyone knowing you. You're afraid of no one knowing you. You're afraid of not being good enough. And you are definitely still afraid of the unknown. Well, I guess I can understand a few of those, but all of them? Listen, pal, you are not perfect. You made a video about fear over a year ago, and you didn't quite understand yourself. You were definitely still soul-searching. You're making this video now so you can understand not only yourself, but also the video and the scope of it. That's why there's a dialogue between two of us right now. I guess you're right. I guess I didn't really think about it, I like to say, oh yeah, I'm just gonna live the best life I can, because the only thing I'm really afraid of is how I'll be remembered and if my life will mean anything to somebody else when I'm gone. I have to be honest with you and me here. I'm terrified of a lot of things. In making this video, I'm discovering what ignorant bliss I've been living in, and the things I'm really afraid of. It's hard to face the impending uncertainty of this world, because at the end of the day, we don't have an explanation for why we're here, and that's probably the scariest thing. I'm very hard on myself. I'm very competitive with myself, not with other people, but with myself. I strive to do the best thing I can every single time, and when I don't, I feel like I've let myself down. Not just with running, which, has become my safe haven for physical activity and for, releasing energy. Along with boxing, but nobody really cares about that part. But with my relationships too. with my girlfriend, with someone who I want to spend my every waking moment with, you know, because I love her so much. I'm afraid of losing her. I'm afraid of making a mistake that I can't go back from. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough for her, you know? I feel like every person can relate to this, but still, it's scary, you know? You don't know truly. So you try to be the best person you can. I'm afraid of losing that. I'm afraid of losing that unconditional positive regard from someone who I care about, who cares about me. I'm afraid of YouTube and the potential for it to never work out. I'm afraid that if I keep doing this every day, keep editing, keep filming, keep tweaking, it'll never come to fruition. There will never be a day where I get a bunch of views. There will never be a day where I get a bunch of subscribers. There will never be a day where my 8-year-old self's dream comes true. That's one of my greatest fears. I don't think about it a lot, but when I do, it really sends me down a spiral, because I've spent years of my life on this goal. I've spent thousands of dollars on equipment and on software and on the studio I've developed for myself. And it's hard to come to terms with the idea that it might not ever amount to anything, and that I might have just wasted all my time. I can't just tell you like, oh, it's easy, just do it. Just accept it. Accept that things can be scary, and that's okay. While that is, in a perfect world, the most ideal advice, none of you watching this video are ever going to be able to amount to that. I can't. Me a year ago might have just said, make your life worth living. It's not that simple anymore. But here's what I will say. No matter what you're afraid of, no matter what keeps you up at night, no matter what you fear losing, the beauty of life is that it doesn't last, and that every moment you spend doing something, every second of your time you spend loving someone, or giving your all in a race, or writing exactly what you need to write, expressing yourself, all these things, there's no real rhyme or reason for why you should do that. But you do it anyway. Not because it's going to amount to anything, not because it's going to help anybody, but because you need to do it. Because you feel it in your soul. You feel it in a way you can't ever express fully. That's what fear is for. To remind you that it's okay to not be okay.
I've seen all I wanted to say, yeah. I'm green, but I've seen all the days inside. I'm breathing in the dust, yeah. I'm breathing in the dust. Feels like night when I start the day. I can sleep, but I wanted a way to keep. I'm breathing in the dust. I'm breathing in the dust. I'm lost, I have lost, yeah. I'm lost, I have lost for the life where I see.
You may not be perfect. Hell, no one is. But if you can accept that, if you can accept that you may lose things, then maybe you'll appreciate them more. Maybe everything will be more valuable inherently. Maybe that love won't just be for nothing. But that's enough of sappy sadness on the scariest night of the year, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry if I felt like I was going on a crazy tangent here, but I feel like I needed to talk about this. I needed to get this off my chest, and what a perfect time to do so. And you've probably learned a little more about me today than I should have shared, but that's okay, because, I mean, what else am I supposed to do, right? If you enjoyed this video, if you actually took something out of this, you know, like the video, maybe comment down below what you're afraid of. And as always, I will see every single one of you capable, amazing people in the next video. Bye-bye!